Please help me warmly welcome to stage the moderator for this discussion, Jude Kearney. A round of applause, please, for Jude. He will be joined by Honorable Tom Aliwendo and also His Excellency Tom Aliwendo, His Excellency Mohammed Hamel, and the last place on the panel will be taken up by Atul Ayira. A round of applause, please, for our moderator and the panelists.
Good morning, all. I hope you can hear me. So thank you all for showing up at this invitation-only gathering. The discussions this morning are as important to Africa as any discussion I've ever been a part of. Our short presentation now will focus really on the issue of making sure that we can align Africa's competing interests. Africa clearly has a tremendous and growing interest in its own development and making sure that we can eliminate things like energy poverty and the like, while at the same time playing a collaborative role with the rest of the globe in trying to address issues like climate change. My two very, very short complaints for NJ is that couldn't you have given us an easier conversation to begin this conversation with? And number two is, listen, there's a lot to cover today. And so we've only been given, a few minutes to start introducing these subjects. As NJ knows, after, a decade and a half of friendship, it takes me normally 20 minutes just to introduce myself. So I'm going to shorten that today, quickly introduce myself, ask the panelists to introduce themselves, and then we're going to just interact a bit on some of the key issues that are relevant to this issue of alignment of Africa's both inherent interests and its obligations to global initiatives. I'm Jude Kearney. I am a number of things, but first and foremost, I'm a lawyer who practices in the energy area. I'm stationed in Washington, D.C., but I've lived on the African continent twice. My whole focus, my whole practice relates to Africa, and that's been the case for the last 30 years of my career. I live and breathe my idea of, first of all, being supportive to my African clients, mostly sovereign clients, but also to making sure that I do my part in trying to help in the development of Africa in the ways that Africa is showing its intention to develop. I lived here in South Africa several years ago and worked very, very frequently in the oil and gas and the power sector, both here in South Africa and in the rest of the continent. And the issues that we're going to discuss today were just beginning to come to the surface when I lived here in South Africa in the early 2000s. They have now started to boil. And the issues are whether or not Africa can continue to develop itself in the ways that it deserves, while at the same time making sure that it plays a role in energy transition. So with that, I'm going to now ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves for 1 minute, and then we're going to just discuss among ourselves some few questions that are quite relevant to this discussion. First, His Excellency Tom.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I'll take less than a minute to introduce myself. Tom Aliwendo is my name. I'm a former Minister of Mines and Energy in Namibia. And I have left the office early this year, and what I'm busy with, having been in that portfolio for about five years, I understand what we need to do on a continent to continue to promote the energy and so that we can end energy poverty. So I'm doing something in private business to again continue to advance that agenda of us making sure that the energy poverty comes to an end on the African continent.
Thank you. Well, good morning. I'm Mohammed Hamel. I'm the Secretary General
of the Gas Exporting Countries Forum, an intergovernmental organization based in Doha, in Qatar, and composed of 20 member countries, 9 of them, by the way, from Africa. I spent the initial part of my career as an engineer in the oil and gas industry, and then I moved to Vienna, where I worked for 13 years with OPEC.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Atul Arya. I'm Chief Energy Strategist at S&P Global, where I look at issues across the entire energy value chain. I do want to congratulate NJ for moving us from the tent by the seaside to this beautiful setting in the last 4 years. You've done a fantastic job. We should congratulate NJ for the great progress, and the team for the great progress so far.
Thank you very much. I have been on panels in the past with Atul, and I certainly have known Tom for a while. And Mohammed, it's a pleasure to work with you. We have a few questions. We have little time, so I want to get some responses on a couple of, I think, important questions to this subject matter. And I'm going to start with Atul, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay. What specific and measurable actions of developed nations need to take beyond just rhetoric to make the African energy transition just and equitable?
Yeah. So as we have limited time, I'll be very brief. Let me just frame the problem, first of all, for everybody, and the opportunity. So the opportunity is energy and resources, the African energy and resources for Africa, but also for the rest of the world, because Africa has abundant potential to supply to the rest of the world. So in order to do that, we need to think about what we call both energy addition and energy transition. So in the sense that we're going to need more energy, but also we're going to transition to new forms of energy. Just to share our S&P perspective, we are going to double the demand for energy in Africa in the next 30 years. GDP is going to double. The demand for oil and gas is going to increase by close to 50%. So we're going to need all forms of energy. To your question then, how do we get there? I think it's going to require, and we heard a very good presentation from the Honorable Minister, who laid out, in my view, some of the most important issues which we need to have here in Africa. The biggest issue is infrastructure, in my view. Because infrastructure is needed to produce the energy, to move energy, and also to move it both within Africa and outside of Africa. I think that's one of the big issues. So why do we not have that infrastructure? We need more investment, both investments coming from within Africa. There are plenty of resources. There are new banks being set up, new financial institutions in Africa. The World Bank is changing its view on what it should be doing in terms of financing projects. So many ways of bringing more funds and then building capacity. That's very critical. Just very last quick example, building on the infrastructure point the minister made. I was in Asia in June at the Energy Asia event we ran. We heard from the ASEAN ministers that already 5 ASEAN countries, smaller than Africa, 5 ASEAN countries are already connected by a grid. Their aim is to connect the entire 10 countries by a grid. How did that happen? They have harmonized their policies. They have harmonized interconnection, electricity regulation. So it's not just saying, well, let's build the infrastructure and it'll happen. It requires a lot of work. It requires work both from the private sector as well as from the government. So it will take a village. And I think there is a lot of will. If there's a will, things will happen. And they are happening here in Africa as well.
Atul, you showed a great template for keeping the answers both meaningful and short. Thank you very much. Mohammed, given your role in regards to gas exports in particular, I wanted to ask your reaction to this. Given that over 500 million Africans lack access to electricity, is it defensible to refuse to allow it to use its hydrocarbons, for example, especially its natural gas, as a transitional fuel to power industrialization?
Well, thank you. You mentioned 600 million without access to electricity. I will add 900 million without access to clean cooking, with indoor pollution causing 500,000 premature deaths in Africa. The energy consumption per capita annually is only 1/3 of the global average, so clearly energy poverty is pervasive in Africa. But before developing further, let me begin by congratulating South Africa and the Honorable Minister for its presidency of the G20, the first in Africa, and also for its leadership under the banner of solidarity, equality, and sustainability. And the priorities presented this morning by His Excellency Minister resonate deeply with the Algeria's declaration of the 7th Summit of Heads of State and Government of the GECF held last year in Algeria. And we are very proud to have 9 member countries from Africa, and also very proud to have a formal dialogue partnership with South Africa on energy. Africa today is 1.4 billion people, and we expect it to be 2.4 billion, 1 billion additional people by 2050. It is a young and thriving population. Working age population in Africa will increase by 90% by 2050, while working age population is decreasing elsewhere. So to transform this demographic dividend into an economic dividend, into prosperity, into alleviating poverty, Africa will need all its energy resources. It needs all its natural resources, but in particular energy resources, be they fossil fuels or renewables. And I believe that natural gas will play, in particular, a crucial role to this end. Natural gas is available. 8.8% of global proven reserves are in Africa, and the continent is still underexplored. It is affordable, it is flexible and versatile. It offers, of course, an important option for clean cooking, transiting from traditional biomass to LPG. Its fuels industrialization, electrification, providing base load, but also supporting intermittent renewables. And more importantly, also, it ensures food security, being the main feedstock for fertilizer production. Of course, turning these resources into supply will require large investments. We estimate investments to be $1 trillion by 2050. Natural gas projects are capital intensive with long lead times and payback periods. So we need, first of all, financing, support of multilateral development banks and other financial institutions, credit guarantees, de-risking of the projects. We need also partnerships, public-private partnerships, partnerships between NOCs and IOCs, partnerships between neighboring African countries for cross-border infrastructure, as well as partnering between Africa and the rest of the world. And I believe more importantly, we need people. This is why local content is extremely important, because it provides opportunities for job creation in the countries. Capacity building is also extremely important. So I believe, to sum it up, that Africa using its energy resources, all energy resources, to develop, to lift its people out of poverty, is not only a right to development, but I believe it is a moral imperative.
Mohammed, thank you very much. An aspect of your answer, dealt with finding financing for all of these important initiatives and for development. And that sort of leads me to ask his former minister, His Excellency former minister, this question. How will African nations secure the billions of dollars in capital needed for new energy infrastructure when global climate policies are discouraging or outright banning investments in fossil?
Thank you. Let me also just thank the organizers, NJ and your team. This discussion has been growing for the last 4 years, and you can see the result of what has been happening. Yeah. But as it was said, let's also keep checking where are we getting. Mm-hmm. We all talk about, we want to end the energy poverty on the African continent, but do we have an indicator to see where we are getting? And therefore, I think as we go on, let's make sure that we do have something to measure ourselves. Mm-hmm. Now, coming to the issue of investment, yes, I think we all realize that we need investment. Africa have got all the resources. We have got a young workforce. We also have the market. Sometimes people think Africa doesn't have a market. We think other people are the one of the markets, but we do have the market as well, because when you say there's poverty, energy poverty on the continent, it means there is a market on the continent. But you need to have partners also who have got the capital, who have got the technology, and we need to figure out how do we make sure then that we do have that capital to come to the continent. And as somebody was saying, capital has got options so that they can go somewhere else, and therefore we need to do certain things when we realize that we are not getting as much capital as we need to have. One of the things as a minister, I was always, when we engage with the people, with the capital markets, the issue they would normally bring up is to say, let's make sure that we do have the regulatory framework is such that it can create certainties in terms of, like, if I bring the capital, what are the processes of doing that, and are we going to have a situation where policies are changing one day and the other day something else? So we had to make sure that we continuously improve our policy regulatory frameworks to make sure that the capital is certain. And capital is quite shy sometimes, maybe sometimes too shy, but that's something what we just need to do that, and therefore we need to de-risk so that at least the investors can price their risks, and they don't like to have confusion in our systems. We also need to keep our fiscal terms stable. It's one thing to have your regulatory framework, which is understood and the processes. But if your fiscal regime is not stable, it's not published, it's changed with every, whatever happens, that can also create issues where people are not so quite sure whether they can actually bring the capital. So we really need to look at that regulatory framework to make sure that we have it, what it takes. And I also want to say, sometimes when we talk about these things, let's also understand, Africa is not really seeking for a special treatment. We aren't looking for special treatment because, as I say, we are actually offering a bankable proposition. We got reliable supply. We got all the things, but we just want to make sure that we do have what it takes to make sure that the other partners with the capital and the technology can also feel comfortable that they can come and collaborate with us to make sure that we do. And also, I also want to make a point. I think we also have to come to a point where the capital which we think we need, it cannot only come from outside the continent. I think we also do have capital on the continent that we actually start to actually leverage on. We have got African institutions that are also willing, but they must also be given clear terms of reference how they can actually deploy that capital. So let's not always rely on the capital outside the continent, but let's also domesticate that capital, I think, by simply offering the same terms, so that at least we can also be having our own capital. So that will be my response.
Thanks, Tom. I'm going to use my personal prerogative here to add a footnote to that. I was moderating a panel at the UN General Assembly meetings last week and the focus was on critical minerals and on funding and financing Africa's production of its critical minerals. So I think that Minister Ramokopa's comment and Tom, your confirmation of that is that capital will in fact find its way to supply demand, to fund demand. And I was sitting on this panel with 3 different heads of international investment banks, and one of them said, there was this period when the policymakers were trying to drive us all away from fossil fuels and other things that were somehow not, consistent with their policies. But the truth of the matter is, we as investment bankers will go right back to those same opportunities if it turns out that the opportunities and the demand can be proven to us. We will be there again. So I think that it's important for us as we have this conversation and make sure that our policies are aligned within the continent, to continue to interact, as you just said, with the capital markets and with others, because I believe that they will come back. Right now, as a matter of fact, there's more discussion about oil and gas and more investment in oil and gas and fossil fuels than there has been in quite some time. So I just think that we need to continue to push forward. I know that others, NJ and others have also been working on a process by which African institutions would come together and provide commercial funding for oil and gas projects when others may wish to stay away. Obviously, that is that's an idea that's still in the making, and it's success will depend on a number of factors. But one way or the other, where there's a will, there shall be a way. And I think all of the ways that we're discussing now and the real exuberance that we're showing, both in this conversation broadly and on this panel, shows that we will find a way to fund what's needed here. We just have time for just a couple more questions, and I'm going to ask them quickly. Atul, I just mentioned critical minerals. Let me ask you this question. The continent has a wealth of critical minerals essential for the global energy transition. What concrete policies are being implemented to ensure these resources, or should be implemented to ensure these resources are used to build domestic value chains and not just exported in raw form?
Yeah, I'll go back to my original comments about infrastructure. And gas, as Secretary General mentioned, one of the great opportunities in Africa is to use the gas in Africa to convert into power, which is a huge need for developing the mining sector. Mm-hmm. So bringing gas into the continent rather than exporting it as LNG. So that will be a big ask. Also building the infrastructure, the roads, and all the power structure we need in the countries which have all the mining, all the resource available. Building transmission lines is going to remain a pretty big challenge. And we saw some of the graphs from the minister's presentation. But I think the real opportunity is natural gas into power and into mining. And there's abundant natural gas. I should point out, as everybody knows, it's a global market for gas, and there is competition. There's a lot of gas floating around the world. So there is good opportunity to use some of Africa's gas here in the continent itself. And there is, of course, the mining conference happening later this week, and we will talk more about this topic. Just one other quick comment I want to make, broader comment on terms of Africa's energy transition. I think Africa needs to think about energy transition and not about decarbonization. It's okay for Africa to carbonize before we start talking about decarbonization. Mm-hmm. It has a very low emission, historical emission, and even in our scenarios from S&P, we don't see those emissions contributing, very small amounts actually into the future. So let's focus on industrialization and advancement of economies and not worry so much about decarbonization. We need to use renewables. I'm not saying let's not deploy renewables, but let's not be the only thing we do here in Africa.
I'm going to ask one last question. It's for either of you to answer. A couple of years ago, during the last U.S. administration, a very senior official from that administration came and had, I think, cordial conversations with some African leaders and policymakers. But the upshot of that conversation was essentially, hey, if we can make it attractive to you, would you consider leaving your resources in the ground? And obviously that was not a question that anybody had anticipated, so I'm not sure that there were ready answers to the question, although the ultimate answer was, I think, no. But the issue is now, if we're confronted with this notion that Africa should somehow abandon its fossil fuels and others, what would be your responses? Mohammed, I'll start with you.
Yes, I think to address this question, it is very important to recall that the UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, recognized in its preamble that, and I quote, socio-economic development and poverty eradication are the priorities of developing country parties. It also sets the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities, therefore recognizing the historical responsibility with regard to climate change of developed country parties. And more importantly, we need to recall the Paris Agreement, where the approach to mitigation and adaptation was a bottom-up approach instead of the Kyoto Protocol top-down approach, whereby contributions by countries to mitigation and adaptation are nationally determined in light of their national circumstances, capabilities, priorities within the context of sustainable development, and also very important, supported by the provision of financial resources, technology transfer, capacity building from developed countries to developing countries. And I believe that we need to respect these international treaties, and therefore the use of energy resources by the African countries has to be set not by the outside world, by the countries themselves. And this is why the GECF expressed, for example, recently its deep concern with the EU methane regulation, which has a de facto an extraterritorial reach, imposing very stringent methane regulations on gas exporting developing countries, sometimes technically almost infeasible. It doesn't mean that GECF member countries are not reducing their methane emission. To the contrary, they are improving, reducing the carbon footprint of their operations, investing in carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Similarly, for the EU carbon border adjustment mechanism, which tries to impose a carbon price on the rest of the world. In the UNFCCC Bonn meetings, developing country parties has expressed their deep concern with this attempt to impose these unilateral regulations on developing countries, which are not consistent with the Paris Agreement, but also not consistent with WTO. So I think we need to go back to what are in the international treaties and implement them. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister Tom, I'm going to...
Yeah.
We have run out of time.
Okay.
We need to allow for everybody else who's coming to speak after this to have ample time as well. So I'm going to ask that, unfortunately, we can't take another question. If we could please kindly wrap it up.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. A round of applause, everybody, for our moderator and our speakers.